Laskey, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Joined today, folks, as you can see, by Laskey, founder of Ground Control Research and our head customer research and customer listening coach over at 90 Day Pipeline. We had Anna on a few times, actually, had some good conversations, one of which we went pretty deep into the whole customer research, or what we call customer listening around here methodology. The TLDR of that, for you, those who haven't listened to that episode, is you can't really make positioning and messaging decisions on the back of the assumptions in your mind. You've got to go to the market, collect some firsthand customer research to inform your positioning and your offer, and so on and so forth. And we've had a whole number of questions since then, Anna, and I think people are starting to believe, at least the right people are starting to believe in the importance of customer research and the necessity of doing firsthand customer research to inform positioning decisions. But I think where folks struggle is, what am I looking for in these conversations? What kind of data am I looking to find? How do I know when I've struck gold, so to speak? And obviously this is a significant part of what we help clients do inside 90 Day Pipeline, but we want to come on today and share some insight for you folks listening, so you can have more clarity on what you're looking for when you get into these conversations. Does that make sense, Anna?
Absolutely.
Okay. Where do you want to start?
Well, as a contrarian, maybe we should start with what you don't want out of these interviews or this kind of customer research that you're doing. I think one of the classic misconceptions that I hear about for folks coming into 90 Day Pipeline and just in my work broadly in the market is that people think this is a feedback exercise. They believe that what they really need is to get feedback on their offer, on their performance, on their services from their past customers or from prospective customers. I cannot overemphasize this enough that feedback is the last thing that you want. It's really the last thing that you want. Because what you're looking for, so this kind of brings us into what we are looking for, is to understand the other party. And by spending the time focusing on getting feedback, it's really actually more about you and your situation, not their situation. So the biggest shift and the biggest thing that I want folks to focus on is, how do I make this conversation all about me understanding that current client, prospective client, past client, and really understanding their journey, their needs, what they're looking for. And I think that's where the nuance of how you ask those questions comes in. But ultimately, what you're looking to understand is, what are the challenges that this customer had or is having? What is the unmet need? And Ahmad, I'm borrowing your terms because you have a great way of explaining it in 90 Day Pipeline to our clients. What are the unmet needs that your offer needs to meet in order to satisfy a prospective client? And then, what does success really look like for that client? Those are the three things.
Yeah. I think the challenge with feedback also is, that old saying, right? Opinions are like blanks,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Blank holes, right?
Got one.
Everyone's got one and they stink. So you ask people for feedback and they'll give you any number of opinions, none of which are grounded in a buying decision, right? Like I'll give you feedback. You want feedback? I'll give you feedback. Am I your buyer? Probably not. Am I going to buy your thing? Probably not. So then feedback to what extent, right? To what end exactly?
Exactly.
So let's come back to this topic of unmet needs. And this is kind of where I want to focus our conversation. Here's my thinking on this, and it's how I explain it is, markets are by nature imperfect. There's always if you put buyers on one side of a market, sellers on the other, there's always a gap. There is never a perfect match of buyer problems and seller solutions, right? That all buyer problems are perfectly met, matched, and satisfied by seller solutions. That market doesn't exist. We only have imperfect markets. And so to me, the question from a customer research perspective is, yes, what are the problems, pain points, challenges? Sure, absolutely. I think that's table stakes. More than that, what are the unmet needs? What are the problems, pains, challenges that you wish you had a solution for, but cannot currently find one, either among your internal resources or among the external providers that you have access to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And to me, that's because, ultimately, why do we do customer research? I mean, at least in within our program, it's to inform your positioning, your messaging, and where you stand in the market. And that's really where the power is in the research methodology, in my estimation. When you find that unmet need, not only do you likely have a client now as a result of that, but you have something really tangible to build positioning around, because positioning now focuses on or claims to solve this unmet need that you validated the market has a challenge with. And now that's the space that you play. So instead of now competing with other people, because if you find a set of common challenges, could you position around those? Absolutely. But you're competing with other people that also solve those problems. And that's not a bad decision, but it's a challenging one, at least a challenging path. You find an unmet need that other people are not competing to solve, at least not in the way that you do it. And that's, now we're kind of entering a little bit more of a blue ocean territory, if you will.
Yeah, and I would say like being aware of your market's problems, like you just said, is sort of the first step of going away from, I would call it the head in the sand approach that many many folks take to building their business, which is like, I just sell solutions and here's me talking about myself and my solutions and me, right? So the first step of going away from that is to be more focused on talking about a problem that you understand a market to have, and why you feel like your solutions or your approach could be helpful to that problem. And I think that's useful, and it's important that people who are building consulting businesses know how to talk about that. But to your point, the next level deeper is, instead of just saying like, oh, you have this problem and I can help you with it because I'm an expert and I think differently. That's the next level below that, is to say, the needs that arise because you have this problem are very clear to me. It's A, it's B, it's C, and therefore I'm actually focused on helping you solve A, B, C, not just talking about problem. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges that our clients in 90 Day Pipeline have, especially in my conversations with them, and I'm sure you have this experience as well, is oftentimes when one, it's just making these shifts, right? And you need support, I feel like, to do that, because you're in your own little echo chamber, and you got to get out of that. It's like a first step. But even as they're making these shifts, I think the challenge arises because they may have been presenting their services to a market in a very specific way for often a number of years. And they're finding out that, wait a minute, this way I used to approach it doesn't work anymore. How do I actually have to make it work? And I don't know, I get it because it's like emotional, but asking a consultant to change their services and oftentimes do less than they were doing is really hard to kind of go through. And the reason we do customer listening is to help our clients get to that place where they're way more flexible about what they could do, and they're much more focused on the unmet needs. Like, everything I do needs to be about those unmet needs that I'm now aware of.
Yeah. I always tell people, like, if you want to work with us inside 90 Day Pipeline, I make no promises that the market will tell you what you want to hear. I can't make that promise. I can promise you'll get the truth, like the whole unvarnished, unfiltered truth, if you do it right. Whether you like it or not, I don't know, right? But at least with the truth, we can make decisions. It empowers us to make some moves, to pivot, to maybe not pivot at all. Maybe it's perfectly aligned with your current offer. But what I can't do is help you build a strategy around your pile of assumptions, like your house of cards of assumptions. That's not a workable path. Would it be helpful, Anna, if we shared a couple of examples with folks? And if you have any more to share, feel free to step in. But the one I like to use, because it's a pretty simple one with folks, is we had a client, you may recall this, and he was a tax advisor. It's probably 6 months ago, a year ago, give or take. Tax advisor, specifically to private equity firms. And what he would do is he'd advise private equity firms on the tax consequences of some of their deals and acquisitions that they're working on. And he did his customer listening with obviously private equity firms and did it well and by the book, so to speak. And what came back was the private equity firms all kind of unanimously said to him the same thing, which is nice. Doesn't always happen, but it's nice when it does, right? And they said, look, we can get tax advisors anywhere. There are a dime a dozen, right? Big firms, boutique firms, independents. There's lots of bean counters out there. We can get tax advice anywhere. What nobody's really giving us, i.e. unmet need, and this is a good language to pay attention to, right? What no one's really providing, what no one's giving us, what we can't seem to tackle, unmet need, is no one's giving us the tax issues that are material to getting the deal done. What we care about is not solving every tax issue. We care about closing this deal. So what are the issues that we have to resolve in order to close the deal? And what other issues can be therefore delegated and deferred to the management team to sort out later on, right? Lo and behold, this client builds his positioning and his offer around this idea of deal relevant tax insights for private equity firms. I'll tell you what's material to closing the deal, not leave you with a laundry list of tax issues. Positioning, differentiation around the unmet need, as opposed to, I'll give you better tax advice.
Right.
Because how hard is that to prove?
Yeah. And I think this is one of like a great example too, because this client of ours went from doing more work to doing less work and closing more deals, because it's a lot less work theoretically. Like and I don't know his business, but to just look at what's the material tax issues that are standing in the way of this deal and not worry about all the 47 other, things that are not material. And then you're helping them solve that. It's a subset. Did he lower his price? No, absolutely not. Right. And I think that's like where we have to get out of this time for money ideas that kind of, maybe even if we're not charging that way, underlie our way of approach, and into this like value of solving meeting an unmet need in a market. Oftentimes we're doing less and we're contributing more by being focused and being that leader and that streamlined expert in a process that our client is already in this case, some sort of M&A type deal.
Well, let's continue with this example and just really bring this home for folks. I mean, put yourself in that client's shoes. You're the private equity firm, okay? One tax advisor gives you a laundry list of tax issues. You're not a tax expert. You cannot decipher which issues are more important than others. And now you have to go through an attempt to decipher that with your management team, have more meetings, more back and forth, potentially with the tax advisor to figure out what's material, right? It's extra work now. That person did more work, and then there's extra work on top of that to find the signal in the noise. Versus another tax advisor just tells you, okay, these are the 3 issues you've got to solve for to close this deal. Everything else can wait. They did less work, and it's easier for you. Where are you going to pay more money? You're going to pay more money to the tax advisor that gives you what you want and makes your job easier, even though they did less work. So, let's to Anna's point, let's decouple this idea of to make more money, I have to do more work. No, to make more money, you have to create more value. And creating more value doesn't necessarily mean doing more work. Often it's the opposite. The other example that comes to mind selfishly is that of our business, right? But I think it's a good example where most solutions and most sellers that we compete with, in air quotes, are very tactically focused, right? Solve the LinkedIn algorithm, send more LinkedIn messages, install this LinkedIn automation, start a podcast. It's all very tactical marketing solution, build a list, whatever, right? And we obviously do all of that, or at least most of that. That's relevant and helpful for consultants. But the thing that we really differentiate on is their unmet need, which is positioning. How many other folks are solving for positioning? Now, understand that we help people get to the finish line ultimately, which is building pipeline and generating revenue and all those things, right? But we don't position around, we can help you beat the LinkedIn algorithm, although there is some value that we create there. We position around the true unmet need, the root cause, which is a lack of or poor positioning, which again, bluer ocean now, right? Because how many folks are solving for positioning? Not many. And obviously we cater to the folks that understand and believe that that is their unmet need. If you don't believe it, then you wouldn't be a good fit. Right. And I think
Absolutely.
That's probably a good example, because I don't think any of you operate in redder oceans than mine. think my market's about as red as it gets. And then there's strategies there that we use that make that viable.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think, you know, again, we practice what we preach over here, right? It's like everything is lined up around the unmet need, but there's so much that happens that clients don't know before they buy, right? What's going to be before them in terms of the coaching, the training, the curriculum, like everything, there's so much, right? But what's important is that the marketing really, really focuses on that unmet need and that little feeling and that little maybe bigger, it grows and grows kind of sensation that consultants have, that is like, I know I could be better at this. I know I could have more deal flow. I know I could have a more stable business. I know that I'm not talking about this in a way that's landing because I'm not getting the result, right? And so I think that's something, actually, like last week on my coaching call, we talked about that. Clients were talking about, but I have to do this part when with my market, there's a problem. This guy works with like food manufacturers. I'll just give a specific example. He works with food manufacturers and he helps ones that are outside the US enter the US market. And sparing a lot of complicated details, he's like, they won't buy because they don't believe that they need what I offer. And I'm like, well, what do they believe they need? Right? Like, what do they believe the issue is? Right? And he walks me through this whole very articulate, like, he's done a lot of customer listening. He's kind of midway through that process. He's telling me this like really, really rich story of these are like all their unmet needs. And I said, so how is it that you can't meet those needs or that this doesn't match up? And what he said was, well, my service goes like this. And he's proceeded to walk me through A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all these things that he does. And he's like, and it has to be done that way to be successful. And I said, absolutely. I said, so why in the world are you telling them about letters B through Q, in your marketing or in your selling? It should all be about that unmet need. And then as you get closer to closing a deal, or actually when you kick off your deal with a client, that's when you can bring in all of this other information where you kind of pull back the curtain and let them see all the secret sauce that contributes to that result. I think we do that wonderfully in 90-day pipeline. And I think this is something that client, right, is just now starting to figure out.
Oh, a classic example of this is people get into the program and they go, oh, there's this fantastic sales training methodology in here that helps me have discovery calls and make offers and pricing and packaging and objection handling. And like, no one even told me this is in here. Yeah, there's a reason for that. That wasn't your need, right? Very few people come to us and say, I have tons of leads and tons of opportunity. I wish I could close more, right? And if that was your unmet need, then we talk about it. But most people are not in that situation. So it's there because you need it once you engage in the program, but it's not what you're looking for. Therefore, we don't talk about it. And I think another important point that you made there, Anna, this idea of, well, they don't believe that they have this problem or they don't think that they need this, right? And so when we talk about unmet needs, we're referring to your clients, your market's conception of what their unmet needs are, not your opinion on what it is or what it should be. And this is, I think, this is like the pill that a lot of consultants have trouble swallowing, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you're the expert, I get it. But, it's like you and your client are on two different sides of this chasm, right? And they live in their world and they see things from their perspective and they have their paradigm and they believe that they have certain needs that are unmet. And you're on the other side and you're the expert and you have absolutely all the solutions to those problems and those needs. But you're not going to be able to communicate with them effectively and build the bridge unless you meet them where they're at, right? You can't speak from your side of the chasm and go, I have all the solutions in the world. It's like you're speaking a different language to them. And it's only once you cross that bridge and meet them where they're at and go, yeah, I agree. Those are your needs. This is important. This is a challenge you've got to overcome. And then paint a picture of how you can help them do that. That doesn't begin with your solution. Doesn't begin with, here's what I do, but begins with, here's your problem, and here's the best way to solve it, right? Client-centric versus solution-centric. That's that's where you get traction. I think we've obviously had a lot of experience with people that had trouble building that bridge.
Yeah, not myself included in that group of people who have had trouble. When I was a 90 pipeline client, actually, that's one of my biggest like memories of or transformations in the program was, I'm very nerdy. I could talk about statistics and analysis and all this really technical stuff all day long. And ultimately, I learned that my buyers, it undermines their confidence in making a decision if that's what I talk about, because then they're like, wait, I have to learn. What is that? What is that? What is this? What is that? If instead I focus on how they talk about their issue, and again, that's why I love our sales training, because it teaches you how to ask those questions just to get it out of them. How are they thinking about it? If I then frame what I can do to help them in that way, in their language, in what it is that they're talking about, what their unmet need is, then I don't have to worry about whether they want to pursue it or not. They're definitely going to want to work with me, and I can save all my technical mumbo jumbo for later. But I think this curse of expertise, or like you said, it's the biggest pill a lot of our clients have to swallow. I think it is the pill that I would say 80% of clients that I work with, and especially all of the ones that get stuck, it's around this, where you may not need to say as much or do as much. And oftentimes people can have an emotional issue, which is, again, why we're here to help with coaching and mindset and all this other stuff that's under the hood of 90 Day Pipeline, to help them navigate that. Because for some people, it almost like if they're not saying all this really advanced stuff, they don't feel like they're contributing enough, or they have some reaction to that. So it's almost like they undermine their own business opportunity because of ego or because of the drive to express oneself in a specific way. So it's definitely a huge part of what we do to help.
You know what it reminds me of? I'm going to manufacture a metaphor here because that's what I do in every podcast. Hopefully it works. But it kind of reminds me of a politician. You know, those politicians where like the media will ask them a reasonable, thoughtful question about an issue, and they'll just deflect to their talking points, right? It's like, I ask you about healthcare, and then you deflect somehow to your climate change agenda, right? And it's like, well,
Right.
you weren't listening to me. You're just
Right.
parroting your talking points. That's what you sound like, Mr. Consultant, Miss Consultant, when, the market says, well, we need X, Y, and Z. And you go, oh, well, I do this.
Right.
Well, that's you're not listening, right? And I think that's the disconnect that ultimately customer research, customer listening solves for. And it's only when you become more open-minded and park your service offering at the door that you can even start to pay attention to what are their unmet needs. Like, you can't even entertain that conversation if you're too stuck in your way of doing things and too married to your service offering, so to speak.
Yeah. And I mean, I would sum it up this way. It's the difference between being of service and offering services.
That's a fantastic way to capstone this episode. Any final thoughts, Anna?
None.
Appreciate you coming on again.
Thank you for having me. It was great to talk to you.